So welcome to a journey to the lands of new. That's what you might call this particular painting of mine. And I wanted to start today because I am a painter and I'm a writer and I'm a poet, but I'm also an educator who spent most of my life wondering about what it was that made learning possible. The title I chose today, Conserving a Disposition for Wonder, Learning as the Perception of Newness, is grounded in work I've done over many years, always spiraling back to the same question: where does newness come from? And what is it that makes us wonder? If we think about it, the next moment is new. It just happened. You had utterly no idea what I was going to do or say. And yet we all act as if we know that the future exists, even though we live in a changing present now. So how does this work? And what is the role of the imagination, which I believe is absolutely fundamental to our capacity as human beings to learn? So before we go on our journey, I'll start with just a way of asking the question, where does newness come from? The painting you see behind you is a painting I did this past year on my iPad. Now, where did it come from? I went to pick my partner up at work last year, and I happened to see all of this lovely looking metal in the recycling bin and took a photograph. Later, it turned into this Guernica-like painting on my iPad, which transformed again into this painting, which won an award last year. How did that happen? Where did it come from? What is newness? And how did I learn to do this, given that I never actually painted on an iPad before? So, where does newness come from? I'll take you on another little story about a father and his daughter on the beach, possibly a beach around our area. And he's introducing her to a small creature that he has found on the shore. Look at her face. Is this wonder? Is this yuck? Which is it? And what is going to happen in the next moment? Ah, she has let him put the creature on her hand. That must have taken courage, because I happen to know that this little girl is a little bit squeamish about things that don't feel exactly the way she thinks they should. So to remain curious around that requires courage. And yet it's curiosity, our disposition for wonder, that's often compromised by our learning experiences. What if she had said, yuck, I'm not touching that? And the parent said, okay, you don't have to. Would she have discovered that this little creature had suckers that adheres to her hand? And she has a look of wonder and delight on her face. It's our imagination that lets us conceive of all that we know and learn from what we perceive. Her perceptions, her sensory experiences of the world, have been transformed into a wonder about this, which is where the beginnings of conceptualization arise. Will this affect her future? Will she become a budding biologist? Will she learn to love the natural world? It's imagination that lets us imagine what the other must also think and feel, and so bring forth a world together in our interactions. Here is the same child offering her experience to the other on her way to becoming that ecologist, that biologist. It is imagination that is the most valuable aspect of our human development. And I claim it is absolutely fundamental and determines our capacity for learning. So, what do I mean by learning? And what can learning look like? Over the many years I've worked in education, I've asked educators, what does learning look like? Sometimes I ask them, what do you do every day as a teacher? And some teachers say, I teach grade 3. Some teachers say, I teach grade 10 math. Some teachers say, I teach 8-year-olds. Some people say, I help people learn. I'm really excited about children learning. And some people say, oh, I just can't wait to see the lights come on every day. So what can learning look like? Learners arise in all the dimensions of their being, moment by moment, just like I just did. What does learning look like? What are you learning in this moment? Sometimes learning looks like loving. Sometimes wonder looks like thinking. Sometimes playing looks like working. Sometimes wonder looks like science. And sometimes learning looks like wonder. So what does learning look like? As many ways as a learner can imagine. Who decides what learning looks like? Who decides? Isn't learning something we as the individual who's learning have a say in? Is it the learner? Is it the observer, the educator who's observing the children and saying whether they're learning or not? Because isn't that what your job is? Or is it the Ministry of Education who determines for the civil society what learning looks like in the form of learning outcomes, learning standards, core competencies? That's what learning looks like. So what does learning look like and who decides? And more importantly, how do we know? Over the last, 25 years, because it began when I did original work around the year 2000, and that gives you a clue how old I really am, about observing for learning. Because I claim that until we are able to observe the learning of the other, we don't know what to do next. So how do we think we can teach? Because when we observe learning, in the moment of it arising, we are seeing the perception of newness. So what do we mean by that perception of newness? Learning is our perception of the moment, this moment we're in right now. And you know what? It is always new. We live in the new, but we act as if we already knew that. We act as if we're in the future and are seeing the past when we're actually in the moment as it arises. And when we become aware of that together and we understand that, this is how we bring forth worlds together that we share. This is what languaging is all about. Conserving the disposition for wonder conserves the imagination of the next moment. It conserves that journey to the lands of new. And this is why our imagination to conceive there is a next moment is fundamental to learning, especially if we are to learn from each other. So another little array over to the side I use one of my paintings as a transition. Imagine my delight, this person passionate about the imagination. I was invited to a conference in Poland last year called Schools for Imagination. And one of the presenters who was on the stage with me was a man called Dr. Andrew Koob, and he is an expert in neurodegenerative diseases. And he'd written a book on astrocytes, which are the star cells that make up 90% of our brain and central nervous system. Well, being a poet, I obviously have to prepare a poem around this. Stars of mind, we are what the stars aspire to be. When closing on themselves, they become the conscious light we are. We are what the stars aspire to be. When closing on themselves, they become the conscious light we are. So why did the stars inspire me this way? Well, Andrew spoke about astrocytes, which are the star cells, the glial cells, which we saw as the glue, glia or glue, in between the neurons. And in the 19th and 20th century doctrines of the neuron, the whole idea of neurobiology dominated. And we thought that neurons and synapses were the source of our intellect and our thinking. But when we saw what happened to the other 90%, looked at calcium puffs and waves as they highlight our whole central nervous system, and Andrew posed, could this be our imagination? You can imagine how excited I was with those ideas. So I don't want to go directly into that. I just want to point to the fact that these are the current wavefront of ideas around what we think about our human nervous system. And it works extremely well in some of the work I actually specialize in working with children on the autistic spectrum who are most challenged with languaging. And this works extremely well in helping to understand that they're fully present and aware, just unable to communicate to us in the way we would like. So for the astrocyte to be the root of thought, it must be able to process sensory information coming from neurons. It must also be able to communicate to motor neurons to stimulate action. So when I showed you this question and I said, what does learning look like? Does she imagine there's going to be a floor that she's going to land on when she threw herself into the air? Astrocytes modulate neuron behavior. This could mean that calcium waves in astrocytes are our thinking mind. Humans have the most abundant and largest astrocytes of any animal, and we're capable of creativity and imagination, which lends credence to this speculation. And it is speculation. It's not proven science. It's the frontier of the originality of our pursuit of the lands of new. Such a biology and an epistemology of imagination is needed in this century as we deepen our understanding of who we are. And lest you think I'm accepting a mechanical model of who we are, I'm not. I'm talking about the deep systemic of being a living system in the living system of Gaia and understanding what that means. Our civil society is seeking to understand what education in the 21st century needs to accomplish to prepare children for what the future holds. Unfortunately, everything I'm seeing is based on the schooling model of the 19th century. Is this going to help the little ones who will inherit the world that is coming? Will this child, when she's my age, what world will she have? We must not mistake schooling for education. In my mind, education is not about consuming knowledge, but about making it. We are not information processors like the machines we've invented. Our gift, the gift of being human, is the capacity to imagine and to add to the knowledge of the world, and to invent the new, to be original. Children compose their knowledge architecture of the world. They design their understanding from how they encounter their experiences. And to understand the world that arises around us, to understand the experiences of those we encounter in our lives, we need to imagine what the other thinks and feels. If we don't have that capacity, how can we have compassion? How can we love our world? How can we respect each other if we cannot imagine the other? Imagination helps us to see the other, to love the other, to care. And in the words of my teacher and mentor, Dr. Umberto Maturana, love is the only emotion that expands intelligence. And in this, he doesn't mean love as a sentiment. He means love as the acceptance of the other as legitimate. In the face of the uncertainty and complexity of our world, imagination is our only survival skill. How can we conserve this gift with which we are born? It takes courage to remain curious when we perceive the new, to say, I wonder, rather than what's that? It takes courage to grade each new experience, each person who's different from us, not with fear, but with curiosity. It takes courage to open into the unknown of the next moment of our life, like now. Imagination is our one infinitely renewable resource. It thrives on curiosity and courage, the heart of our disposition for wonder, to see each other, to wonder what you think, and how do you see the world. This is the journey to the lands of new that we must help our children to continue if we are to survive and prosper as the loving animal, the loving species that we are. So I will end returning us to an image of that journey to the lands of new, that pursuit of understanding. What is the imagination? How do we conserve wonder?